If you stopped the world's engines today, civilization as we know it would collapse within weeks. 90% of everything we eat, wear, and use travels by sea. It is an invisible circulatory system that keeps the modern world alive. But this system has a weakness. It relies on a handful of narrow, vulnerable passages known as choke points. For over a century, the Western Hemisphere has had only one true artery, the Panama Canal. It is a marvel of engineering that shortened the distance between New York and San Francisco by 8,000 miles. It defined the 20th century, but in the 21st century, Panama is struggling. Despite its recent expansion, the canal is facing water shortages, waiting times that stretch into weeks, and a physical limit on the size of the behemoth ships that now rule the oceans. Global trade is suffocating, and it demands a new route, a bigger, deeper, and wider path. Enter the Nicaragua Grand Canal, a project 3 times the length of Panama, a $50 billion gamble intended to slice through dense jungles, massive freshwater lakes, and active volcanic terrain. Proponents call it the engine that will lift the second poorest nation in the Americas out of poverty. Critics call it a colossal environmental disaster and a geopolitical Trojan horse planted by China in America's backyard. It is a story about the shifting balance of global power, the hubris of engineering, and the mysterious disappearance of the biggest infrastructure project the world has never seen. Why has the dream of the Nicaragua Canal haunted us for 200 years? And is it truly dead, or just waiting for the right moment to reshape the world map? Geography is destiny, and for centuries, Nicaragua seemed destined to be the crossroads of the world. Even before modern engineering, nature had done half the work. The San Juan River connects the Atlantic Ocean directly into the massive Lake Nicaragua. This natural waterway meant that a ship could traverse almost the entire width of the continent with relatively little digging required. In the mid-19th century, during the California Gold Rush, this was the primary route for prospectors traveling from New York to San Francisco. It was controlled by the American tycoon Cornelius Vanderbilt. It was faster, healthier, and closer to the United States than the route through Panama. For decades, Washington viewed Nicaragua, not Panama, as the logical site for a transoceanic canal. In fact, in 1901, the U.S. Walker Commission officially recommended Nicaragua as the superior location. The engineering was easier, the climate was slightly better, and it was closer to American ports. The deal was all but signed. So why do we have a Panama Canal today? The answer lies in one of the most effective lobbying campaigns in history and a single postage stamp. Philippe Varela, a French engineer desperate to sell failed French assets in Panama to the United States, executed a masterstroke of psychological warfare. Days before the U.S. Senate was to vote, the Momotombo volcano in Nicaragua erupted. Varela scoured the capital's stamp dealers, bought 90 stamps showing the volcano spewing smoke, and pasted one on a letter to every U.S. senator. His message was simple. Do you want to build your canal in a country of exploding mountains? Panic set in. The Senate switched its vote. The United States bought the French rights to Panama for $40 million, and Nicaragua was left at the altar. For the next century, the U.S. even paid Nicaragua, through the Chamorro-Bryan Treaty of 1916, specifically not to build a canal with anyone else. They wanted to ensure no rival power could challenge the monopoly of Panama. The dream lay dormant for 100 years, buried under civil wars and political instability. But in 2013, the ghosts of the past were awakened. This time, however, the knocking on the door didn't come from Washington. It came from Beijing. In June 2013, the silence was broken. President Daniel Ortega announced that Nicaragua had found a partner to finally realize the centuries-old dream. But the partner wasn't a nation-state, nor was it the World Bank. It was a private, mysterious entity based in Hong Kong known as the HKND Group. At the helm was Wang Jing, a telecommunications tycoon with significant wealth but zero track record in large-scale infrastructure. He had never built a bridge, let alone the largest civil engineering project in human history. Yet Ortega handed him the keys to the country. The legal framework for this deal, known as Law 840, was pushed through the Nicaraguan National Assembly in a matter of days with little debate. It was less of a contract and more of a concession of sovereignty. The law granted HKND the rights to build and operate the canal for 50 years, renewable for another 50. That is a century of control handed to a private foreign firm. But the deal didn't stop at the water. It gave HKND rights to expropriate land for a host of sub-projects: 2 deep water ports, an international airport, an oil pipeline, a railway, and massive free trade zones. It was a state within a state. The projected cost? $50 billion, 4 times the GDP of Nicaragua at the time. Wang Jing promised that the project would double Nicaragua's GDP almost overnight and create 250,000 jobs. For a country where nearly 30% of the population lives in poverty, this was sold as economic salvation. But for analysts looking closely at the fine print, the numbers didn't add up. Where was the $50 billion coming from? Wang Jing claimed he would raise it from international investors, but Wall Street remained skeptical. The sheer opacity of HKND's financing raised a critical question. Was Wang Jing truly a rogue billionaire acting alone? Or was he a proxy for a much larger, silent partner, the Chinese Communist Party? To understand the audacity of this project, you have to look at the numbers. The Panama Canal, a project that cost thousands of lives and took decades to perfect, spans 82 kilometers. The proposed Nicaragua Canal, 278 kilometers. It is not just a copy of Panama, it is Panama times 3. But length is not the only metric that matters. Width and depth are the new gold standards. Modern maritime trade is dominated by megaships, vessels like the Maersk Triple E class, which can carry over 18,000 containers. Even with its recent expansion, the Panama Canal struggles to accommodate these titans fully loaded. Nicaragua designed its canal specifically for them. The blueprints call for a channel up to 30 meters deep and over 500 meters wide at its broadest points. This would allow the largest ships in existence, and those yet to be built, to bypass the bottlenecks of the South. But achieving these dimensions requires moving Earth on a scale never before attempted by human civilization. Engineers estimated that the excavation would require removing 5 billion cubic meters of material. To put that in perspective, that is enough dirt and rock to build a wall around the entire Earth's equator, 2 meters high. The route isn't flat, it cuts through the Rivas Isthmus, requiring the construction of 2 massive lock systems, the Brito and Camilo locks, designed to lift these Leviathan ships 27 meters above sea level to match the elevation of Lake Nicaragua. These locks would be the largest concrete structures ever poured, dwarfing the Hoover Dam. And they have to build all of this in a zone known for high seismic activity and active volcanoes. It is an engineering challenge that teeters on the edge of madness. It requires defying gravity, geology, and economics all at once. If completed, it would be the 8th wonder of the world. But for the people living in the path of those bulldozers, it wasn't a wonder. It was an apocalypse. In the heart of the country lies Lake Nicaragua. The locals call it Cochibolca, or the Sweet Sea. It is the largest freshwater reserve in Central America, a source of drinking water for hundreds of thousands of people, and home to rare species found nowhere else on Earth, like the freshwater shark. To the Nicaraguan people, this lake isn't just water, it is their identity. The canal project proposes to drive a shipping lane straight through the middle of this lake. To accommodate the megaships, engineers would need to dredge a trench 105 kilometers long and 30 meters deep. Scientists warn that this dredging would act like a nuclear bomb for the ecosystem. Millions of tons of ancient sediment, currently settled at the bottom, would be churned up. This turbidity would block sunlight, kill the microscopic plants that produce oxygen, and effectively asphyxiate the lake. The Sweet Sea could turn into a dead zone, a stagnant, muddy highway for oil tankers. But the destruction doesn't stop at the shoreline. The canal route slices through the Mesoamerican Biological Corridor, a critical land bridge connecting the ecosystems of North and South America. It would bisect the habitats of jaguars, tapirs, and harpy eagles, isolating populations and dooming them to genetic decay. This is one of the last great rainforests in the hemisphere, and the canal would open its flanks to deforestation, poachers, and illegal settlements. And then there are the people. The route threatens to displace up to 120,000 Nicaraguans, many from indigenous Rama and Creole communities who have lived on this land for centuries. They were not asked, they were told. For them, the arrival of the Chinese bulldozers isn't progress, it is an invasion. The question haunting environmentalists is simple. Is it worth killing a country to save its economy? If you look at this project solely as a business venture, it makes little sense. The returns on investment would take decades if they ever materialized at all. But if you look at it as a geopolitical maneuver, suddenly the picture becomes crystal clear. This isn't just about shipping containers, it is about the string of pearls. For 2 decades, China has been methodically acquiring control over the world's most critical maritime nodes. From the Indian Ocean to the Mediterranean, Chinese state-owned enterprises manage ports that act as commercial hubs today, but could serve as naval assets tomorrow. The Nicaragua Canal was meant to be the crown jewel in this strategy, a Chinese-controlled gateway into the Atlantic, right in America's backyard. Since 1823, the United States has operated under the Monroe Doctrine, essentially declaring the Western Hemisphere off-limits to foreign powers. A Chinese-controlled canal in Nicaragua would effectively kill that doctrine. It would give Beijing the power to dictate the flow of goods to the U.S. East Coast and theoretically a deep-water port capable of hosting Chinese warships just a few hundred miles from Florida. Consider the strategic vulnerability. Currently, the U.S. Navy relies on the Panama Canal to move fleets between oceans. But in a time of conflict, what if Panama is compromised? Or what if a rival power controls the only alternative route? Whoever holds the keys to the canal holds the keys to the oceans. While the Chinese government officially distanced itself from Wang Jing's private venture, few intelligence analysts bought the story. The scale of the project aligned too perfectly with President Xi Jinping's Belt and Road Initiative. It is a classic strategy. Use a private front to secure a strategic foothold, minimizing direct diplomatic fallout, while the state waits in the wings to reap the benefits. Washington's reaction was curiously muted publicly, but privately, alarm bells were ringing. The U.S. began ramping up diplomatic pressure on Nicaragua. They knew that if concrete started pouring in Rivas, the geopolitical balance of the 21st century would shift irreversibly. This was a silent war, fought not with missiles, but with feasibility studies, sanctions, and shadow diplomacy. But just as the grand strategy seemed set to unfold, something unexpected happened. The pieces on the board began to crumble. The threat that kept Pentagon generals awake at night wasn't defeated by American intervention. It was defeated by the one thing no superpower can control: the market. They promised a revolution of earth and steel. They promised the roar of engines and the clinking of champagne glasses. But today, if you travel to the site of the supposed Grand Canal, you will not find excavators. You will not find engineers. You will find only silence. The kind of heavy, humid silence that reclaims everything in the tropics. In late 2014, the digging officially began. But digging is a generous word. The company, HKND, managed to widen a single dirt access road. They moved a few truckloads of earth, posed for photos, and then stopped. The heavy machinery was parked. The workers were sent home. The project that was supposed to rival the pyramids ended up being smaller than a local highway repair job. So what killed the giant? The assassin wasn't American intervention. It was a stock market ticker in Shanghai. In June 2015, the Chinese stock market suffered a catastrophic meltdown. The bubble burst. Wang Jing, the mysterious billionaire behind the curtain, saw his personal fortune evaporate overnight. According to the Bloomberg Billionaires Index, his net worth plummeted by 84% in a matter of months. He went from being one of the richest men in China to a cautionary tale. His telecommunications company, Xinwei, faced scrutiny for debt and irregular accounting. The stream of cash that was supposed to flow into Nicaragua didn't just dry up, it ceased to exist, and then the man himself vanished. Wang Jing, once ubiquitous on Nicaraguan television, disappeared from the public eye. Reporters visiting HKND's headquarters in Hong Kong found a ghost office, a registered address with no busy staff, no blueprints on the tables, and no phones ringing. It began to look less like a construction company and more like a shell game. The $50 billion had likely never existed in the first place. It was a projection, a fantasy based on inflated stock value that was never liquidated into hard cash. For years, the Nicaraguan government refused to admit defeat. They kept the Canal Commission open. They continued to budget for a project that was clearly dead. Why? Because the idea of the canal was politically useful. It kept the hope of economic salvation alive for the poor, and it kept the opposition paralyzed with the fear of imminent displacement. But as the years dragged on, a darker theory emerged among geopolitical analysts. What if the canal was never meant to be built? What if the dirt road was just a prop in a much larger diplomatic theater? Fast forward to December 2021, the final act of the illusion. Without warning, Nicaragua severed its long-standing diplomatic ties with Taiwan and officially recognized the People's Republic of China. This was a major victory for Beijing in its campaign to isolate Taiwan. Suddenly, the pieces fit together. The canal project had served as a massive decade-long carrot. It was the bait used to lure Nicaragua into Beijing's orbit. China didn't need to dig a trench, they just needed to promise one. Once the diplomatic switch was made, the need for the canal evaporated. The strategic partnership was sealed, but the water remained calm. The canal was the ultimate phantom project, effective precisely because it was never real. But while billionaires played chess and governments swapped alliances, real people were left in limbo. For nearly a decade, thousands of Nicaraguan families lived with the sword of Damocles hanging over their heads. They couldn't sell their land because it was earmarked for the canal. They couldn't invest in their farms because they expected bulldozers any day. They lived in a state of suspended animation, victims of a law 840, that technically still gave a bankrupt Chinese company rights over their homes. The psychological toll was immense. Communities were fractured. The Comité Nacional, a peasant movement formed to fight the canal, faced persecution, jail, and exile. They fought a monster that turned out to be a hologram. In the end, the bulldozers never came to destroy their homes, but the threat of them effectively destroyed their peace for a generation. Today, nature is reclaiming the only physical evidence of the project. The access road is washing away. The survey markers are rusting in the rain. The Grand Canal of Nicaragua joins the list of history's greatest almosts, sitting alongside the flying cars and moon colonies we were promised. It stands as a monument not to engineering, but to the volatility of global finance and the cynicism of modern geopolitics. It is a scar on the map that you cannot see with your eyes, but you can feel in the economy of a nation that waited for a ship that never came. However, in the world of strategic infrastructure, nothing is ever truly dead. As climate change dries up the Panama Canal, and as global trade wars heat up, the file on Nicaragua is dusty, but it is not burned. So, is the Nicaragua Canal dead? If we look at the bank accounts of HKND, the answer is yes. But if we look at the climate, the answer is far more complicated. The Panama Canal runs on fresh water, and Panama is drying up. In recent years, droughts have forced canal authorities to reduce the number of ships passing through and limit their weight. The choke point is slowly choking itself. As the planet warms and global trade volumes continue to explode, the world's reliance on a single century-old ditch in Panama becomes a dangerous gamble. The logic that drove the US to look at Nicaragua in the 19th century and China in the 21st hasn't changed. The geography is still there, the water is still there, and the strategic hunger of superpowers is eternal. The failure of Wang Jing's project wasn't a failure of geography. It was a failure of execution and finance. It was a scam wrapped in a dream. But history teaches us that bad ideas die, while strategic necessities merely sleep. Someday, perhaps in a decade, perhaps in a century, another power will come knocking on Nicaragua's door. They will bring better blueprints, real money, and the same old promise of salvation. Until then, the jungle will keep its secrets, and the Grand Canal will remain the greatest ghost story of the maritime world.